Hey everybody, Brian with Quackpack here. In this video on Independence Day, I thought we'd make it just a little bit different. So we're going to be introducing a new series today, and that series is called Powder and Iron. So this series is something I'm going to start that's kind of a passion project. This first episode is going to be about the Americans' War of Independence. So what better time to drop this video than July 4th? More specifically, it's going to be about John Burgoyne's campaign, 1777 Wilderness Campaign, culminating in the Battle of Saratoga. If you guys like what we're doing, give a comment, give a like, subscribe, please. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see next. It really helps us out. In this footage, you're going to be seeing a lot of stuff like 3D game footage. That's actually from a game on Steam called Rising Front. There'll be a link down below. A couple of these maps in here were actually created by a gentleman from there on their Discord. We'll link the Discord there too. So his name on Discord is Cho. He put a lot of time into making some of these maps. Did it for free, wouldn't take payment for it. So, just check out the game if it's something that you like interesting. We use it for a lot of the footage. Pretty fun game, pretty neat. So check it out. That's called Rising Front on Steam. Like I said, that link will be down below. So let's get into it. The year 1777 looms large in the annals of American history, a year marked by the indelible scars of conflict, the clash of ideals, and a wilderness turned battlefield. It was a year of the terrible sevens, a time when the tomahawk, musket, bayonet, and bow and arrow ruled the frontier. This brutal struggle unfolded across the rugged wilderness of New York and its neighboring colonies, a fiery inferno rightly remembered as the Wilderness War of 1777. The ideological seeds of this revolutionary year had been sown decades earlier, sprouting in the minds of urban intellectuals and the untamed spirits of the northeastern wilderness. As European settlers ventured into the New World, they left behind the rigid societal constraints of the Old World, stepping into vast forests and uncharted lands. They encountered a new way of life, shaped by the wilderness and the Native American tribes who had long thrived there. Unlike Europe's crowded villages and tightly regulated existence, the New World offered settlers freedom. In the dense forests, they toiled with axes, cleared fields, and hunted for survival. The absence of authoritarian oversight fostered a self-reliant spirit, physical resilience, and an unyielding desire for independence. This frontier ethos clashed directly with Britain's desire to control the colonies and exploit their burgeoning trade. Following the French and Indian War, Britain emerged as a dominant power in North America, but maintaining control required more than just dominance over the coastal cities. Britain's network of royal governors sought to extend its influence into the wilderness. Yet the settlers there, a diverse mix of trappers, farmers, craftsmen, immigrants, increasingly resented British rule. The wilderness had fostered a fierce independence, and by the mid-1700s, this sentiment pervaded New England and the northeastern forests. When the Revolutionary War erupted in 1775, Britain aimed to sever rebellious New England from the other colonies. To achieve this, its forces planned a bold campaign through the vast, roadless wilderness. British leaders underestimated the region's challenges, believing that their seasoned armies and Loyalist allies would swiftly quell the revolt. They failed to account for the unforgiving terrain and the indomitable spirit of the wilderness settlers. The campaign of 1777 was fraught with difficulties. Forests, swamps, rivers, and mountains rendered conventional warfare nearly impossible. The British, accustomed to Europe's cultivated forests and orderly settlements, were ill-prepared for America's untamed wilderness. Roads were scarce and often impassable, and dangers lurked behind every tree. Patriot forces, though poorly equipped and scattered, possessed survival skills that were honed in the frontier. They knew how to navigate, hunt, and fight in the wilderness, making them formidable adversaries. The human toll of the Wilderness War was immense. Civilians and soldiers alike faced unimaginable hardships. The war brought hunger, fear, and violence to every corner of the region, from Oswego to New Hampshire, and from the Canadian border all the way down to New York City. The soundscape of the war cries, gunfire, cannon blasts, and the terrifying hiss of bullets and arrows was a constant reminder of its brutality. Women, too, played a critical role in defending their homes and secretly aiding the Patriot cause. For many, the war was not about lofty ideals, but about protecting their families and their way of life. Among the war's notable figures were African American soldiers like Agrippa Hall and Prince Whipple, Native American warriors like Onyeri Thorngorkin Doxtator and his wife Two Kettles, and countless anonymous soldiers whose sacrifices shaped history. Little note there, I am going to butcher the hell out of some indigenous names, so I apologize in advance. The Patriot Northern Army, an integrated and multinational force, embodied the revolutionary spirit. Its soldiers, white, black, Native American, and immigrants, fought side by side, united by a common cause. 1777 was also a year of profound political and societal change. New York State was officially established, holding its first free election and drafting a constitution that endures to this day. Vermont declared itself an independent republic, banning slavery and laying the groundwork for progressive ideals. Yet the year also marked the beginning of the end for the Iroquois Confederacy and the pristine wilderness itself. As settlers and industries moved in, forests were felled, wildlife diminished, and the wilderness gave way to economic expansion. The war's human drama was just about as compelling as its political significance. Stories of individual courage and tragedy abound. Jane Campbell, for example, witnessed the brutal murder of her mother and endured the loss of her cousin at the Battle of Oriskany. Major John Ackland, a captured British officer, later died in a duel defending the honor of his Patriot adversaries. A gentleman back in Britain was mouthing off about how poor fighters the Americans were, and John Ackland defended their right and challenged a man to a duel. He died in that duel, defending the fierceness of the American fighters in this war. Timothy Murphy, an Irish-American patriot, became a legend for his deadly marksmanship and unrelenting commitment to the cause. The pivotal victory at Saratoga, a series of battles culminating in General John Burgoyne's surrender, was a turning point. It bolstered American morale and convinced foreign powers like France and Spain to support the Patriot cause. The news of Burgoyne's defeat reverberated across the Atlantic, shaking British confidence and altering the course of the war. However, the cost of the war was staggering. The economy of New York and New England was devastated, with all the crops burned and livestock lost. Inflation was soaring. Civilians suffered from starvation and disease, particularly during the extra harsh winter from 1777 into 1778. Amidst that suffering, though, the resilience of the people had shown through. Civilians and soldiers alike persevered, paving the way for a new nation. The Wilderness War of 1777 was more than a military conflict. It was the crucible that tested the mettle of a fledgling nation. It demonstrated the value of an armed citizenry, the strength of diverse communities, and the enduring power of human spirit. Though it brought an end to the wilderness and altered the course of Native American history, it also laid the foundation for the United States of America, a nation forged in the fires of struggle and sacrifice. As the echoes of the shot heard around the world rang out at Lexington in April of 1775, the American Revolution escalated into a full-blown conflict. Within months, what began as a rebellion led by militias had evolved into organized standing armies, pitting the fledgling Patriots against the formidable might of the British Crown, then considered to be the most disciplined military force on the planet. The stakes were colossal. King George III and his advisors knew that if the American colonies succeeded in breaking free, it could ignite a domino effect, unraveling the entirety of the British Empire. In 1775, prominent British military minds, including Canada's Governor Guy Carleton and Generals William Howe and John Burgoyne, identified New England as the epicenter of this rebellion. A hotbed of revolutionary fervor, New England's population overwhelmingly supported the Patriots, with only about 10% remaining loyal to the crown. Major General Sir Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne, a strategic thinker, proposed a bold plan in late 1775, which he had titled Reflections upon the War in America. He envisioned a double-pronged assault onto New York. One force would advance southward from Canada, while another pushed northward from New York City or New England. The two would converge, isolating New England and crushing the Revolution's core. By mid-December 1776, Burgoyne was back in England, attending to his personal matters and visiting family during the Christmas season. His time in London also allowed him to engage with the King and Parliament on military strategy. Despite the British Army's success in the New York and New Jersey campaigns earlier that year, Burgoyne was uneasy. Unlike many British commanders who believed that the rebellion was on its last legs, Burgoyne's instincts told him otherwise. Meanwhile, George Washington led his battered Continental Army across the icy Delaware River on the evening of December 24, 1776. This army, created over a year ago, on June 15, 1775, was young and inexperienced, lacking adequate supplies, training, and leadership. Yet it was fueled by an indomitable spirit. Between December 25th, 1776 and January 3rd, 1777, Washington executed a series of maneuvers that shattered the Hessian forces at Trenton and outmaneuvered British troops at Princeton, capturing critical supplies and reinvigorating the revolutionary cause. These actions were later hailed by Frederick the Great of Prussia as masterful examples of military strategy. The repercussions were felt across the Atlantic. King George III and his ministers, shocked by Washington's victories, realized that the rebellion was far from quashed. British High Command began formulating plans for a decisive campaign in 1777. Burgoyne's earlier ideas gained renewed attention. On February 28, 1777, Burgoyne, still in England, submitted a detailed strategic paper titled Thoughts for Conducting the War from the Side of Canada to Lord George Germain, the Secretary of State for the Colonies. Burgoyne proposed advancing southward from Canada, first securing Lake Champlain and using Crown Point as a base. Fort Ticonderoga, a major Patriot stronghold, would then be captured. From there, the army would either join forces with General Howe's troops advancing northward from New York City or push into the Connecticut River Valley with support from Rhode Island forces. Burgoyne also suggested a secondary offensive via Lake Ontario and the Mohawk Valley to divert enemy attention. While Burgoyne's plans outlined broad objectives, they lacked specific tactical details. Historians continue to debate his intentions, particularly regarding the coordination with Howe and other British forces. His writings leave questions unanswered. Would Burgoyne meet Howe in Albany? How would communication lines be secured? And despite these ambiguities, Burgoyne's belief that New York held the key to victory was clear. Unbeknownst to Burgoyne, General Sir William Howe had his own strategic vision. As early as October 9, 1776, Howe would emphasize the importance of opening communication lines with Canada via the Hudson River to strike at New England. By late 1776, Howe proposed a multi-pronged approach: a northern offensive targeting Albany, an attack from Rhode Island into New England, and an invasion of Pennsylvania to capture Philadelphia, the revolutionary capital. On November 30th, 1776, Howe wrote to Germain, reporting his successes in New York and outlining his plans. He believed that simultaneous operations, including a southern campaign against Philadelphia, could end the war within a year. Howe requested reinforcements, estimating he would need 35,000 troops, including additional recruits from Germany and other European nations. However, by the 20th of December, Howe's confidence in a quick victory began to waver. He suggested postponing the New England campaign, focusing instead on Pennsylvania. In a letter to Germain, he expressed his belief that capturing Philadelphia would decisively turn the tide into Britain's favor. The events of Trenton and Princeton further complicated British strategy. On December 29, 1776, Howe acknowledged Washington's growing threat, emphasizing the need to destroy the Continental Army while capturing Philadelphia. He anticipated Washington would defend the city, providing an opportunity to crush these patriots in a decisive battle. On January 14, 1777, Germain responded to Howe's November letters, indicating that the king had not yet decided on a comprehensive plan. But by March 3rd, Germain, now informed of Washington's recent victories, had authorized Howe's plan to proceed with his Pennsylvania campaign. However, Germain's approval came with caveats, as he and King George III were increasingly concerned about potential French intervention. France, though defeated in the French and Indian War, remained a powerful adversary and showed growing support for the American cause. In late March 1777, Burgoyne left England for Canada, setting sail aboard the HMS Apollo on April 3rd. Before departing, he stopped at London's prestigious Brooks Club, a hub for military officers and intellectuals. There, Burgoyne confidently declared that he would return victorious by Christmas of 1777. His boast drew a sharp retort from Charles James Fox, a vocal critic of British policy in America. Fox predicted that Burgoyne would return, but as a prisoner of war. The two men formalized their disagreement with a 50-guinea bet, and it was recorded in the club's ledger. As Burgoyne gazed into the night sky after leaving the club, he pondered the immense challenge ahead. A man of intellect, charm, and unwavering loyalty to the crown, Burgoyne was determined to succeed, despite the uncertainties. By the 20th of April, Howe had expressed doubts about his ability to support Burgoyne's advance from Canada. This lack of coordination would prove disastrous. Howe's focus on Philadelphia diverted resources and attention from Northern campaign, leaving Burgoyne's forces isolated. Which brings us to the larger context. The stakes in 1777 extended beyond the battlefield. British leaders were acutely aware of the geopolitical implications. France, seeking its revenge from its earlier defeats, edged closer to openly supporting the American cause. Speed was absolutely of the essence for Britain. A prolonged war risked drawing France and possibly Spain into the conflict. As Burgoyne sailed toward Canada, the British High Command faced a strategic quagmire. Divergent plans, poor communication, and underestimating the Continental Army's resilience set the stage for a pivotal year. The unfolding campaigns would test the mettle of both sides, with the fate of a nascent nation hanging in the balance. As British High Command grappled with the growing American rebellion, the spring of 1777 found them at a strategic crossroads. By the 8th of May 1777, General Howe's letter of April 2nd had reached Lord George Germain, the Secretary of State for the colonies. At the same time, King George III and his ministers, including Lord Frederick North, reviewed proposals from both General John Burgoyne and General Howe regarding military operations in the colonies. Their deliberations revealed a shared understanding that a decisive action in New York and New England was essential to securing a British victory. Burgoyne's bold plans, endorsed by Lord Germain and King George, called for a forceful advance southward from Canada to Albany, New York. To complement Burgoyne's campaign, Lieutenant Colonel Barry St. Ledger was tasked with leading a secondary offensive eastward through the Mohawk Valley to converge with Burgoyne at Albany. Furthermore, it was assumed that General Howe would march northward from New York City, joining forces with Burgoyne and St. Ledger to consolidate British control in the region. Although there were murmurs of an additional thrust originating from Ocagua, a wilderness area near Pennsylvania, its specifics remained nebulous. This smaller force, composed of Loyalists, Native American allies, and British advisors, was expected to move through the Schoharie Valley and eventually merge with St. Ledger. However, from the outset, significant issues plagued these plans. The British High Command, from King George to Lord Germain, failed to establish clear directives or cohesive coordination. This absence of unified leadership would sow confusion and ultimately contribute to the disastrous outcome of the Wilderness War of 1777. Central to the British failure was the simultaneous approval of two fundamentally divergent plans. In his December 20th, 1776 letter, General Howe proposed an offensive targeting Pennsylvania, with Philadelphia as the primary objective. Germain, with the king's backing, approved this plan. Yet just months later, Germain and the ministers also sanctioned Burgoyne's strategy to seize New York. These conflicting priorities created a rift in the British war effort. Worse, Lord Germain neglected to inform Burgoyne of Howe's shift in focus to Pennsylvania, leaving Burgoyne operating under the assumption that Howe would march north to Albany. By the 18th of May, Germain compounded the confusion. Responding to Howe's April 2nd proposal to reach Philadelphia via a sea route, Germain expressed confidence in Howe's plan but emphasized that it should not preclude cooperation with Burgoyne's campaign. He wrote, "Trusting, however, that whatever you mediate, it will be executed in time for you to cooperate with the army ordered to proceed from Canada and put itself under your command." This vague directive, though intended to ensure coordination, instead left Howe with excessive discretion. and a troubling lack of urgency. The delayed transmission of Germain's response only exacerbated the problem. By the time Howe received Germain's letter, he was already en route to Philadelphia via Chesapeake Bay. The disjointed nature of British leadership raised several critical questions. Did Germain anticipate that Howe's campaign in Pennsylvania would be swift? Was it considered a secondary offensive meant to complement Burgoyne's push from the north? Or did Germain genuinely believe that Howe could manage both campaigns effectively? The answers remain speculative, but Germain's indecision and failure to establish clear timelines or priorities sowed seeds of chaos. Further complicating the British effort were the deep-seated animosities among its senior political and military leaders. Generals Howe and Clinton harbored mutual mistrust, while Governor General Guy Carleton viewed Germain, North, and even Burgoyne with disdain. Howe's relationship with Burgoyne was similarly strained, and nearly everyone held a low opinion of Lord Germain. Some of these rivalries were rooted in decades-old grievances, while others stemmed from clashing egos and conflicting strategies. These divisions hindered effective collaboration and decision-making. Disagreements, while not uncommon in high command, reached a debilitating level within British leadership in 1777. The lack of cohesion, coupled with personal animosities, created an environment where strategic decisions were often undermined by petty disputes and conflicting priorities. The British campaign of 1777, plagued by vague directives, overlapping plans, and internal discord, was doomed from the start. Germain's failure to prioritize one plan over another, his excessive latitude granted to military commanders, and the pervasive mistrust among British leaders all contributed to the unraveling of their efforts. As the campaign unfolded, these shortcomings would manifest into critical failures, ultimately leaving the British defeated in the Wilderness War of 1777. General John Burgoyne arrived in Quebec to commence preparations for his ambitious campaign to seize Albany. The mild winter had spared the region from the typical hazards of floating ice on the St. Lawrence River, which ensured that river traffic, critical for military logistics, would flow unimpeded. Burgoyne was relieved. A harsh winter could have delayed his plans and paralyzed operations. Burgoyne reached Montreal and met with Governor General Sir Guy Carleton, who simultaneously held the title of Commander-in-Chief of the British Army in Canada. Burgoyne had harbored concerns about Carleton's enthusiasm for the upcoming campaign. However, these doubts were swiftly dispelled. Carleton not only expressed wholehearted support for the operation, but also promised to assist Burgoyne in any way possible. Despite this, Carleton's intelligence network left much to be desired, and the governor admitted to having little actionable information. To Burgoyne's dismay, secrecy surrounding the campaign was almost non-existent. Gossip about the impending operation had spread far and wide. Even low-ranking soldiers seemed to be aware of the general's plans. Alarmed, Burgoyne formally complained to Canada's adjunct general, Lord Harvey, and to Carleton himself. As any experienced commander knows, operational security is paramount. Burgoyne feared the Americans might already be privy to his intentions. Fortunately for him, these fears were unfounded. The Patriot had yet to catch wind of the plans. Burgoyne faced another pressing issue, the lack of adequate transportation. This was not a new problem for the British Army. It wasn't until 1799, with the establishment of the Royal Wagon Train, that the British military developed a reliable transport system, independent of civilian contractors. In 1777, the Army's reliance on civilian drivers and managers created a host of difficulties. These individuals, not being subject to military discipline, were often unreliable and uncooperative, especially in challenging circumstances. The shortage of animal power exacerbated the logistical challenges. Burgoyne estimated he needed 700 to 800 horses to haul artillery and provisions. His second-in-command, General William Phillips, an experienced combat leader, confirmed that at least 400 horses were required to solely pull the heavy artillery. Additionally, 2,000 horses were needed to transport the army's baggage, provisions, and equipment. Despite these calculations, Burgoyne began his campaign with fewer than 700 horses. This shortfall would haunt him throughout the entire operation. Adding to these woes, Burgoyne requested 500 light, two-wheeled carts for rapid mobility. However, corruption and theft, rife within the British Empire's supply chain, had taken their toll. Many carts had disappeared before Burgoyne's arrival. Worse still, seasoned wood intended for the cart construction had also gone missing, forcing craftsmen to use unseasoned green wood. This substitute proved disastrous, as the carts often split apart while in use. The campaign required traversing several major waterways, including rivers, lakes, and streams. Bateaux, versatile riverboats, were essential for transporting troops and supplies. These boats varied in size, with the most common being 30 to 32 feet long and capable of carrying 2,000 to 3,000 pounds under ideal conditions. Although there were enough bateaux available, the lack of skilled Canadian manpower forced Burgoyne to assign soldiers to operate these boats. Burgoyne's army began its southward movement from Chambly, a town near Montreal on the Richelieu River's rapids. Chambly also has a fort bearing the same name. The troops advanced to St. John's, then called St. Jean-sur-Richelieu, about 22 miles southeast of Montreal on the Richelieu River's western bank. This site, equipped with a sizable fort, became the army's staging area. From St. John's, Burgoyne's plan was straightforward yet ambitious. His forces would navigate the Richelieu River into Lake Champlain, capturing Crown Point and the formidable Fort Ticonderoga. With these obstacles neutralized, the army would cross into Lake George. Sailing southward, they would reach Fort George on the lake's southern shore. From there, Burgoyne intended to proceed overland to Fort Edward on the Hudson River's northern bank. The final leg involved marching down the Hudson River to Albany. This town, a crucial road and river junction, was where Burgoyne planned to unite with Lieutenant Colonel Barry St. Leger's forces advancing from the Mohawk Valley and General William Howe's troops marching northward from New York City. The combined might of these three armies would shatter Patriot resistance in New York, sever the Mohawk and Hudson Valleys, and isolate New England, the revolutionary heartland, from the rest of the colonies. Burgoyne and his superiors, including King George III, Lord Germain, and Lord North, were confident in this grand strategy. They envisioned a triumphant campaign that would force General George Washington to divert his Continental Army northward to confront Burgoyne's superior forces. In their minds, Washington's defeat was inevitable, and with it, the revolutionary effort would collapse. Yet as history would soon reveal, the logistical challenges, overconfidence, and lack of coordination among British leaders would transform this bold plan into a catastrophic failure. The march to Albany would not only test the limits of Burgoyne's army, but also alter the course of the American Revolution. By the time General John Burgoyne forces reached St. John's, the first major assembly point for the British Army in Canada, his multinational strike force began to coalesce into a formidable military machine. This army was a blend of diverse contingents: seasoned English infantry, elite German brigades, resourceful Canadian recruits, loyalist Americans, and fierce Native American allies. Together, these groups formed the backbone of an ambitious campaign aimed at cutting off New England from the rest of the colonies and quelling the growing revolution. From the British Canadian Army, Burgoyne had selected an array of infantry regiments: the 9th, 20th, 21st, 24th, 29th, 31st, 47th, 53rd, and 62nd Foot Regiments. Alongside these regiments, specialized artillerymen, naval personnel, supply units, and civilian workers contributed to the Army's strength. To complement the British forces, German soldiers were organized into two brigades. The 1st Brigade included von Retz, von Specht, and von Riedesal's regiments, while the 2nd Brigade comprised Prince Frederick and the Hesse-Hanau regiments. These German brigades, renowned for their discipline and battlefield prowess, provided a critical edge. Central to Burgoyne's forces was the British infantry, oftentimes referred to as the Queen of Battle. At the time of the American Revolution, the British Army fielded 70 foot regiments, a number that would grow to 105 by the war's end in 1783. Each regiment consisted of 10 companies, 8 battalion or center companies, 1 grenadier company, and 1 light company. The grenadiers, often the tallest and strongest soldiers, carried the legacy of their namesake weapon, the grenade, even though hand grenades had fallen out of use. Their distinctive bearskin caps and brass-plated cartridge boxes symbolized their elite status. Meanwhile, the light companies, composed of agile and physically fit men, were tasked with scouting and flank protection during marches. A full regiment of 10 companies typically numbered 600 to 650 soldiers, with additional support personnel assigned to equipment repair, horse care, and logistical tasks. Each infantryman carried the iconic Brown Bess musket, a 75 caliber smoothbore weapon. While its accuracy was limited, effective only up to 100 yards, the musket's design emphasized massed volleys over precision. In battle, British regiments employed coordinated line formations, relying on concentrated firepower followed by bayonet charges to overwhelm their enemies. Despite these tactics, Burgoyne was among the few British commanders who recognized the value of marksmanship and began organizing specialized shooters' corps. At the helm of this intricate military apparatus was Sir John Burgoyne. Born on the 24th of February, 1723 in London, known as Gentleman Johnny, Burgoyne was a man of many talents, a general, politician, dramatist, and playwright. His military career began at 17, and by the time the 7 Years' War, he had risen to the rank of brigadier general. As a member of Parliament and an accomplished writer, Burgoyne brought a unique blend of intellectualism and strategic acumen to his command. Though Burgoyne's strategic vision was highly regarded, his tactical execution often invited criticism. Nevertheless, his determination and charismatic leadership inspired confidence among his subordinates and troops. Burgoyne's deputy, Major General William Phillips, was a seasoned artillery officer with 2 decades of experience, while Baron Friedrich Adolf von Riedesel commanded the German contingents with discipline and precision. Burgoyne's army was a tapestry of nationalities and cultures. The core of the British contingent numbered 3,724 troops, supported by 3,016 German soldiers. Additional forces included Canadian and Loyalist units, Native American warriors, and civilian camp followers, bringing their total strength to approximately 8,000 personnel. However, estimates of the army's size would vary, with some accounts suggesting up to 9,500 individuals, including officers, musicians, and non-combatants. The Loyalists formed a unit known as the Queen's Loyal Rangers, commanded by Major Ebenezer Jessup and supported by Colonel John Peters. Despite initial promises of robust Loyalist recruitment, their numbers remained modest. Similarly, the Native American allies, initially expected to number over 1,000, amounted to only 400 or 500 warriors at the campaign's outset. These warriors were led by controversial figures like Chevalier Saint Luc de la Corne and Charles de Langlade, both of whom had reputations for opportunism and dubious ethics. The Canadian contingent, though small, played a crucial role in logistical support. 2 Canadian light infantry companies, commanded by Captain René Antoine de Boucherville and David Monin, provided scouting and pioneering expertise. However, recruitment challenges meant that only about 200 Canadians joined Burgoyne's ranks, far fewer than anticipated. Supplying such a diverse and mobile force was a monumental task. Commissary General Nathan Day oversaw the provisioning efforts, assisted by deputies Jonathan Clark and Fleetwood Parkhurst. Their responsibilities included ensuring adequate supplies of food, ammunition, and equipment. However, logistical shortfalls plagued the campaign from the beginning, with shortages of transport animals, wagons, and seasoned wood for cart construction. Burgoyne's reliance on the Canadian manpower and resources further strained the Army's supply lines. The lack of sufficient horses and reliable transport hindered the movement of artillery and provisions, creating bottlenecks that would hurt the campaign. As Burgoyne prepared to march southward into New York, his army represented the culmination of meticulous planning and multinational cooperation. Yet beneath its impressive exterior lay cracks. Logistical inefficiencies, overestimated Loyalist and Native American support, and the challenges of coordinating such a diverse force. With all of these factors in play, Burgoyne's campaign was poised to test the limits of military strategy and the resolve of the American revolutionaries. Under the clear skies of St. John's, General John Burgoyne gathered his commanders and esteemed guests, including Canada's Governor-General, Sir Guy Carleton, for a magnificent review of his assembled forces. This event was no ordinary inspection, but a theatrical pageant designed to awe and inspire. Along the banks of the Richelieu River, Burgoyne's fleet and ground forces stood in impeccable formation. To mark the occasion, a thunderous display of firepower ensued. Every cannon aboard the fleet and the fort unleashed a synchronized volley. The three-masted Royal George, boasting 32 guns, and the inflexible frigate, armed with a massive 24-pounders, joined the cacophony. Schooners like the Carleton, Maria, and the Thunderer, along with some of the smaller captured vessels, including the Washington and New Jersey, added their voices to the symphony of war. Smoke from the bombardment enveloped the fleet, while the roar echoed for miles, signaling the start of the ambitious campaign. Yet amid this celebratory scene came unwelcome news. Carleton, cautious about possibilities of an American counterattack in Canada, retained critical troops initially promised to Burgoyne. The 34th Foot Regiment, along with significant portions of the 29th and 31st Foot, and several German and independent companies were held back. Compounding this setback, logistical delays caused by damaged roads and makeshift carts, hastily constructed from unseasoned wood, disrupted the flow of supplies. Many carts splintered en route, and Burgoyne's dragoons remained largely horseless, forced to march until adequate mounts could be acquired. Carleton, however, assured Burgoyne that reinforcements and additional resources would soon follow. Burgoyne's ultimate destination was Albany, located nearly 180 miles south of St. John's. His route traced a path up the Richelieu River into expansive Lake Champlain, whose 120-mile stretch separated New York's Adirondack Mountains from Vermont's Green Mountains. Numerous rivers, including the Lachute River and the Medowee, fed into this vast lake. The campaign's first major objective was Fort Ticonderoga, positioned about 115 miles south of St. John's on the lake's southwestern edge. After capturing the fort, Burgoyne planned to march to Lake George, navigating its northern waterfalls via the Lachute River. Once reaching Fort George, on the lake's southern shore, the army would press on through the wilderness trails to Fort Edward along the Hudson River. From there, the plan envisioned a steady southward advance, passing through settlements like Saratoga and Stillwater to seize Albany. Burgoyne anticipated linking up with General William Howe's forces from New York City and General Barry St. Leger's western advance through the Mohawk Valley. Together, these converging armies would sever New England from the other colonies and crush the Revolution. Fort Ticonderoga, nicknamed Fort Ti by the Patriots, was a critical position. Originally built by the French as Fort Carillon in the 1750s, it served as both a fur trading post and military stronghold. Its commanding location of the junction of waterways made it a vital choke point. Though the fort's defenses had been expanded during the French and Indian War, decades of neglect left it vulnerable. In 1776, Colonel Judithan Baldwin led efforts to revitalize the fort, constructing new docks, a sawmill, and a bridge linking Fort Ticonderoga to the newly built Fort Independence on the opposite side of the shore. Despite these improvements, many critical features, including the dominating heights of Mount Defiance, remained undefended. Mount Defiance, with its 853-foot summit, loomed to the southwest of Fort Ticonderoga. In 1776, Colonel John Trumbull had warned that its elevation made it the key to the fort's defense. He demonstrated this by firing cannon rounds from the fort towards the summit, proving its vulnerability. Similarly, Polish engineer Colonel Tadeusz Kosciuszko emphasized the strategic importance of Mount Defiance, but met resistance from Fort Ticonderoga's commanders, who deemed the summit impassable due to the steep terrain and dense vegetation. These oversights would soon prove disastrous. As Burgoyne's forces entered Lake Champlain, they sailed into a sprawling wilderness that formed the northern reaches of New York's frontier. This untamed expanse, rich with wildlife, was both a marvel and a menace. Soldiers marveled at the abundance of moose, bears, and waterfowl, while enormous snapping turtles and floating logs posed hazards to the flotilla. Nights ashore brought relentless swarms of black flies and mosquitoes, leaving many soldiers sleepless and miserable. Dr. Julius Friedrich Wasmus, a Brunswick surgeon, described the experience of the Cumberland Head as miserable, recounting swamps teeming with snakes and insects. Burgoyne, however, enjoyed more comfortable accommodations aboard the ship Maria, rumored to host not only the general, but also a female companion. This stark contrast between Burgoyne's comforts and the soldiers' hardships underscored the hierarchical nature of the campaign. Reaching Cumberland Head, Burgoyne inspected the regiments and issued orders for the next phase of the campaign. General Simon Fraser's advance guard had already occupied the Boquet River's mouth, 35 miles further south, on June 17th. Though no major engagements had occurred, the skirmishes between Patriot and British scouts had intensified. Both sides sought intelligence, with Patriot scouts capturing 2 British prisoners, Adams and Amesbury. Under interrogation, they revealed that Burgoyne's formidable army, composed of British, German, Canadian, Loyalist, and Native American forces, advancing south towards Fort Ticonderoga. However, doubts lingered about the reliability of their information, as St. Clair feared that they might be deliberate misinformation agents. As Burgoyne's army moved closer to Fort Ticonderoga, its commanders exuded confidence. To them, the campaign seemed straightforward, a calculated march through rivers, lakes, and settlements filled with Loyalists. Yet, the wilderness posed unpredictable challenges, and the Patriots' resilience remained untested. The convergence of Burgoyne's forces, with Howe and St. Leger, was crucial to the campaign's success. But as events unfolded, the cracks in the grand strategy would become glaringly apparent. For now, Burgoyne's gaze remained fixed on the south, where Fort Ticonderoga and the fate of the northern colonies awaited. The sharp report of a cannon from General Burgoyne's flagship, the Maria, pierced the early morning air, signaling the resumption of the British advance up Lake Champlain. Burgoyne's next target was the mouth of the Boquet River, a crucial waypoint on the lake's western shore. As the flotilla departed Cumberland Head, Burgoyne's army maintained its organized march formation. General Simon Fraser's advance guard, already stationed at the Boquet since June 17th, spearheaded the movement. Major General William Phillips commanded the right wing along the lake's western bank, while Major General Baron von Riedesel led the left wing along the eastern side. Burgoyne, ever tactical, remained aboard the Maria at the center of his force to oversee operations. The army's strength was formidable. 3,252 British troops, 3,007 Germans, 500 Native American auxiliaries, and 145 Canadians, totaling more than 6,900 men. This figure excluded American Loyalist volunteers, who primarily served under Fraser due to their familiarity with the region, as well as the 670 naval personnel operating the fleet. Camp followers, including civilians hitching rides on the bateau, further swelled the numbers. Supporting this multinational force were 138 artillery pieces, handled by approximately 500 British and German gunners, underscoring the campaign's reliance on firepower. Burgoyne's fleet reached the Boquet River on June 20th, joining Fraser's advanced guard. Known to the locals as Gillian's Creek, this site became the Army's new encampment. Meanwhile, 35 miles south at Fort Ticonderoga, General Philip Schuyler, commander of the Northern Army, arrived to confer with General Arthur St. Clair. Schuyler, acutely aware of the fort's precarious defenses, had come to assess the situation firsthand. Fort Ticonderoga's garrison numbered between 2,500 and 3,000 men, organized into 4 brigades, comprising 12 regiments. These forces were commanded by Generals John Patterson, Enoch Poor, and Chevalier Matthias Alexis de la Roche-Femeroy, all subordinate to St. Clair. The Fort Scouts operated under Major Benjamin Whitcomb, while artillery was directed by Major Ebenezer Stevens. Despite this roster, many regiments were under strength, with some reduced to a mere handful of effective companies. Schuyler's concerns about manpower were not new. As early as March of 1777, he had petitioned Congress and General George Washington for an additional 10,000 troops to defend the fort and 2,000 more to secure the Mohawk Valley. These reinforcements, however, proved elusive. The fledgling nation's army was stretched thin, and Congress, though sympathetic, struggled to meet the escalating demands of war. Dubbed the Gibraltar of America and the key to the continent, Fort Ticonderoga held immense strategic and symbolic value. Its capture by Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen's Green Mountain Boys on May 10th of 1775 had a pivotal early victory for the Patriots, boosting morale and securing much-needed artillery. Yet 2 years later, the fort's defenses remained incomplete despite the tireless efforts of figures like Colonel Judithan Baldwin and Polish engineer Tadeusz Kosciuszko. Reinforcements had been bolstered by African-American freemen recruited by Lieutenant Colonel Udney Hay, Deputy Quartermaster General, to assist in fortifications. Even so, the fort was plagued by logistical challenges, equipment shortages, and a lack of animals for transportation. Adding to the fort's mystique were its eerie surroundings. Located deep in the wilderness, the region was infamous for its long, harsh winters and chilling legends of serpent-like creatures inhabiting Lake Champlain. General Anthony Wayne once described the area as a cold, inhospitable region, the last part of the world that God made, and he finished it in the dark. Contrary to some claims of starvation, the garrison at Fort Ticonderoga enjoyed ample provisions in mid-1777. Journals from Reverend Hitchcock and Captain Moses Greenleaf detail meals of venison, duck, beef, and fresh vegetables from the fort's gardens. Scouts brought in game, and the fort was well stocked with flour for bread and biscuits. However, tension simmered within the ranks, exacerbated by a personal feud between Generals Schuyler and Horatio Gates. The rivalry between Schuyler and Gates had begun in 1776, following the American retreat from Canada. Congress, seeking a new commander, had appointed Gates to lead the Northern Army. However, as the remnants of the Canadian expedition fell under Schuyler's jurisdiction in New York, the two generals clashed over control. Gates, supported by influential figures like John and Samuel Adams, argued that these troops belonged to him. Congress attempted to mediate by instituting joint command, but this arrangement only deepened the animosity. Schuyler, who had the higher rank, retained overall authority, prompting Gates to return to Washington's army in Pennsylvania. Despite this, Gates' allies in Congress continued lobbying for Schuyler's removal. In March of 1777, Congress briefly replaced Schuyler with Gates, only to reverse its decision in May, reinstating Schuyler. This back and forth exacerbated tensions within the Army's leadership and sowed confusion among the rank and file. The feud would have lasting implications in the Northern Army's cohesion during the critical months ahead. As June 1777 progressed, the fate of Fort Ticonderoga and the Northern Department hung in the balance. While Burgoyne advanced with a meticulously organized force, the Patriot defenders grappled with incomplete fortifications, internal divisions, and limited resources. Both sides prepared for the inevitable confrontation, each aware that the outcome could reshape the course of the war. General John Burgoyne's forces had finally coalesced at the Bouquet River, ready for the decisive push towards Fort Ticonderoga. A troop count confirmed the army's size: 3,724 British regulars, 3,016 German allies, 473 artillerymen, 250 Canadians and Loyalists, and 400 Native American auxiliaries, totaling 7,863 combatants. However, this impressive number fell short of Burgoyne's original February of 1777 request for 8,000 regulars, 2,000 Canadians, and 1,000 Native Americans. Attrition from desertion, accidents, and losses to Patriot scouts under Major Benjamin Whitcomb had taken its toll. Despite these setbacks, Burgoyne sought to win the support of local colonists and mitigate further bloodshed. On Saturday, the 21st of June, Burgoyne addressed his Native American allies, a gathering of 400 warriors from the Iroquois, Ottawa, Algonquin, and Abenaki tribes. In an impassioned speech designed to rally their fervor, Burgoyne's dramatic oration, amplified by a translator, incited a frenzy among the warriors, who erupted in war cries of "Etau, Etau, Etau," as tomahawks and muskets were raised in unison. Burgoyne tempered their zeal with a stern directive: non-combatants and prisoners were to be spared, and scalps would not be rewarded. On the following day, Sunday the 22nd of June, Burgoyne issued a proclamation to local colonists. He portrayed himself as a liberator sent by King George III to restore order amid the unnatural rebellion of the American colonies. He denounced the Patriots as hypocrites who inflicted tyranny and persecution under the guise of liberty. Burgoyne appealed for cooperation, warning that resistance would unleash his indigenous allies. Copies of his proclamation soon circulated on both sides of Lake Champlain, eliciting varied reactions, some humorous, others scornful, but all reflective of growing skepticism towards British intentions. Both sides engaged in relentless reconnaissance. On Monday, the 23rd of June, Patriot scout Sergeant Heath reported observing 5 British ships anchored near Otter Creek, just 42 miles north of Fort Ticonderoga. Heath's findings confirmed the enemy's proximity, as did the skirmishes between scouts. One such incident saw 2 Patriot soldiers ambushed by Native American warriors. One was killed and scalped, while the other, John Batty, survived his own scalping through sheer endurance, and then later fled back to the fort. Adding to British intelligence was the capture of James Mackintosh, a Scottish settler loyal to the crown. Mackintosh divulged critical details about Fort Ticonderoga's garrison, estimating its strength at 4,000 and highlighting its defensive vulnerabilities, including the unfortified heights of Mount Defiance, which loomed over the fort. Burgoyne's initial plan to advance on the 23rd of June was thwarted by severe storms that battered the region until the 29th, delaying his approach. By the 30th, his forces had reached Crown Point, just 10 miles north of Fort Ty. Major Alexander Lindsay, the Earl of Balcarres, led the advance guard, while General Simon Fraser positioned his troops within striking distance of the French line, the fort's western defenses. At 8 a.m. on Wednesday, the 2nd of July, Fraser's troops seized the high ground west of the French lines, naming it Mount Hope. This maneuver allowed the British to envelop Fort Ticonderoga's left flank. Fraser's light infantry and native scouts probed the fort's defenses, engaging in sporadic skirmishes. Despite an initial American volley of 3,000 musket shots, British casualties were minimal, and Fraser's forces remained undeterred. On the first anniversary of American independence, Fort Ticonderoga's defenders fired a 13-gun salute to boost morale. That same day, British engineers under Lieutenant William Twiss identified Mount Defiance as the key to the fort's downfall. Twiss reported to General Fraser and Major General William Phillips that artillery could be positioned on the summit to dominate both Fort Ticonderoga and nearby Mount Independence. General Phillips famously remarked, "Where a goat can go, a man can go. And where a man can go, he can haul up a gun." The decision was made to seize Mount Defiance. Under the cover of darkness, 400 soldiers and axemen began hauling up 2 12-pound cannons up Mount Defiance's nearly vertical slope. Using block and tackle mechanisms, they overcame the terrain's steepness and reached the summit by 2 p.m. the next day. The Americans, initially dismissive of Mount Defiance's strategic importance, were stunned to find British artillery now threatening their positions. Recognizing this untenable situation, General Arthur St. Clair convened his officers and decided to retreat under the cover of darkness. The plan involved 2 escape routes. 200 bateaux would transport supplies and wounded personnel through Skenesborough, while the main force would march southeast towards Hubbardton. To deceive the British, sporadic cannon fire would continue through the night. Disorganization plagued the retreat, though. Major General Fermoy, intoxicated and negligent, failed to prepare his troops on Mount Independence, further complicating the evacuation. At 3 a.m., an accidental fire at Fermoy's headquarters illuminated the entire area, exposing the retreat to the British observers on Mount Defiance. By dawn, Fort Ticonderoga's defenders had abandoned their posts. British advanced unopposed, claiming the fort as Burgoyne's first significant victory. However, the retreating Patriots, though demoralized, had preserved the core of their forces. St. Clair's decision to prioritize his army's survival over the symbolic loss of Fort Ti would prove pivotal in the months to come, as those same troops regrouped to halt Burgoyne's advance at Saratoga. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. If you guys like what we're doing here, give us a like, drop a comment, letting us know what you guys want to see moving forward. This is going to be the first installment. Part 2 is going to be dropping soon. So let us know what you want to see after this. That'll really help us out. So make sure you guys subscribe and hit that notification bell so you guys get notified the minute that this drops. And you guys can check out the next segment. If not, while you're waiting, why don't you guys check out Unearthed? It's my father's segments here of metal detecting. Kind of ties right in here. And if you're done with that too, why don't you head on over and watch the podcast that me and my cousins do. Thanks, guys. See you around.